couple wanders into a small Midwestern town where there are no adults to be seen anywhere. That's basically the story of Children of the Corn, a adaptation of a Stephen King novella. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hallelujah.
And I thought that we've talked before about the connection between religion and horror and stuff. And I think, in this case, we definitely see like, it's like, a key part about it and stuff. And I'm wondering, like, what is it that is kind of the taboo that is going to just basically, come automatically, I guess, with like when you dive into kind of religious themes and stuff, in horror.
Well, I mean, clearly the link is supernatural, They're both kind of most religions deal with this idea of what comes after death, or what we should be afraid of after death. And, a lot of horror movies deal with monsters that are coming back from the dead or don't live in the normal sort of realm of the living. So it's kind of a natural fit, I think, for a lot of the sort of things that prey on our kind of fears of these things.
I think it's a great point that, religion tries to answer, some of the questions of, like what happens after death and stuff. And meanwhile, I think horror is just definitely dealing with the fears that we have that, like, all these things that we really, what if, like, there is no afterlife? What if there, for that matter, what if the afterlife isn't such a desirable thing and stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's religion's main purpose really is to alleviate a lot of those fears, and says all you've got to do is turn up and read this book and pray, and everything will be all right. So it almost diametrically opposite to that.
Yeah. So in the first, original version, it's 1984. And we have Linda Hamilton in her role as Vicky. She's, same year as the Terminator, which of course, was the role that really made her a star and stuff like that. And then we also have Peter Horton, and this is way before his key role on this television series called 30-something and stuff. And the screenwriter said that the metaphor that he really wanted to deal with here was the revolution in Iran, which at the time, that was like kind of one of those things that was such a major news and stuff like that, where, you have a takeover by, zealots and stuff. And here he's, apparently he's treating, Burt, who's, kind of Peter Horton plays and stuff, and Vicky as like kind of the American hostages, if you will, and stuff in this scenario.
Yeah, I mean, both Burt and Vicky definitely represent this kind of scientific, rational, kind of young, aspirational couple who are not religious at all by any stretch of the imagination, and are there to try and, as a sort of the idea being a viewer surrogate, I guess. But it's interesting, the Iran connection. I didn't realize that was what he was trying to sort of channel through it. The thing I took away from it, I don't know if this was maybe from the Stephen King story, but I got this idea that it was more of a comment on intergenerational differences and parenting, how young couples are pressured into parenting, and they might be trying to deal with more traditional roles or culture differences that come their way, and how to sort of deal with that when raising kids. But you could read it in other ways, but I mean, definitely it is like a complete takeover of that community by a very extreme belief system. So
it definitely echoes a little bit of what we saw in the Omega Man, where like you had like kind of the kids that were the survivors and stuff, but in this case, the kids actively like I got rid of the adults and stuff. And that's a funny kind of thing of where I don't know, like it makes you wonder with like the he who walks behind the rose and stuff, like what was it that kind of what was this being's motivation, right, to get rid of the adults? I'm thinking that's because they weren't as susceptible, or they like kind of I don't know, like they weren't as pliable, I guess, as the children's minds.
Yeah, I mean, I would, yeah, I would go along with that, and that it, you know, children's minds can be more easily shaped and more manipulated. You know,
which
uh,
which 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 kind of
or,
goes to the idea of religious fundamentalism, right? Like you want to start them young. You know, that's kind of what they do with like,
yeah,
basically they have these indoctrinations and on and on.
or any cult leadership is often about sort of
Right.
deprivation, humiliation, and manipulation, basically,
Yeah.
and using those against them, and making the only sort of reward system within their hierarchy of the beliefs that are in that cult or religion. So yeah.
But meanwhile, like no art and music. I mean, that was like a funny thing with like kind of like the little girl Sarah, right? She was had these drawings from her visions and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But otherwise, like it's kind of forbidden, like kind of.
yeah, that was quite an interesting one, actually. I hadn't really given much thought to the lack of music and drawing and things like this, because yeah, that does go along with some very sort of extreme religious beliefs in various
Yeah.
places,
It's,
normally associated with the belief system itself rather than art or music in general. But
mm,
a classic example would be Islam not being able to depict Muhammad. So yeah, there's
and it's funny too because on the other hand, they do like have what's called hymns and like kind of song in
yeah.
churches and stuff. But yet, it's like kind of anything outside of that is like kind of kind of corrupting music and stuff. Like it, like at some point we'll have to do Footloose. It's kind of, a more interesting kind of take on that one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought it was quite interesting in a way, in that they juxtapose this whole thing of only being able to sing in church and only the pictures of that are associated with the beliefs. But then you had Job and Sarah at their old parents' house,
Yeah.
dressing up in their parents' clothes with makeup
Right.
and jewelry and playing Monopoly, which I thought was really interesting because it's almost like this. It's like a sort of a microcosm of the Western
Mm.
societal trap that you have of accumulating things,
Mhm.
and then how that had no meaning in their
Yeah.
village, that had lost all meaning whatsoever, and it was
Mhm.
outlawed, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, you could almost say it's sort of a little bit like a communist, well, it is a commune more or less, wasn't
Mm.
it, of kids. So
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
they were basically portraying like kind of the ways of the Outlanders, like kind of like
absolutely.
all of the corrupt ways and stuff.
And I mean, the way
um,
you could, I mean, if you do look at it in terms of that, it's kind of interesting if you look at it as anti kind of communist, because it's almost saying communists are sort of children playing at society, and
mm.
Western values are the sensible ones which you should be adhering to, perhaps. Not that I would say not that, communists necessarily kill their parents and stuff, but
Right.
there's a few sort of similarities, I guess, somewhere.
And the other thing that we see is like kind of this power dynamic, which kind of really grows over the course of the movie and stuff like that between Malachi, who's like kind of this more grown up kind of kid and stuff like that, and Isaac, who's just of course that he's the creepy kid who's like kind of really like kind of when you think of Children of the Corn, he's like it, like
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I would say, I mean, it's obviously it's worth mentioning that John Franklin, who played Isaac, was actually 25 when they did this, and he's
right.
he had a growth hormone deficiency, hence. But he was very, very creepy and very effective as Isaac, far more so than in the remake. But I guess we'll get to
Yeah,
that later.
we'll get
But
to
yeah, I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
he's definitely the most memorable part of Children of the Corn for me, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and something else that we'll kind of talk more about in the remake and stuff is the fact that like a lot of the actors were like kind of older and stuff. It's like they had this
Mm.
category I think we mentioned before in one of the other discussions about this kind of thing in Hollywood called 18 to look younger. That like it's these older kids that still look like they can pose as high school and younger or something like
Nothing creepy about that.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think as well for me, the original story is quite of an interesting one because it made me think. In a way, there's a lot of stories that Stephen King has that use kids. You have It,
Mm,
which is predominantly about kids,
right.
and has a very adult scene in the sewers that isn't in any of the movies.
Yeah.
The Shining really is about kids dealing both with a kind of a supernatural element that they can't really control or understand against parents or adults who are against them. And I would say, Stand By Me is another kind of child-based Stephen King movie.
Yeah, and we just did Carrie a short while ago, which is about the cruelty of kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a sort of an overarching matriarchal figure who's pretty horrible. So it's definitely a recurring theme with him. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and also with Carrie was like kind of the religious theme again about extreme, kind of beliefs and stuff. So that's I guess sometimes it'd be really interesting to kind of sit down with Stephen King and ask about like kind of what why are these such themes like that he really goes back to again and again. I imagine there's probably some interviews out there, but I haven't really caught any and stuff like that. At some point I'll have to kind of dive more into that.
I mean, I'm guessing for him it's if I had to put myself in his shoes, and this could just be the fact that we haven't bothered to Google it, but I would say it's the familiarity of having like a small town that's supposed to be like a cozy neighborhood, which we've touched on a number of times about how he went about that, but also this idea of like something that's supposed to be kind of wholesome and familiar, like a church gathering that couldn't really be completely, they completely twist the beliefs into something very fundamentalist and dangerous. I think there's a reason that's a recurring theme, because it has happened historically, in lots of places. Just have to look at Nazi Germany, or there's countless examples, I'm sure, where you can think of where religion has turned ugly, or a belief system that's kind of turned an otherwise very rational country, into something quite different in a very short period of time.
Yeah, the more real life story that this also reminds me of is that recently, I forget the name of the author, but in the book Educated, she talks about having this kind of religious fundamentalist upbringing, and of course it's like set in Utah, so it's like kind of related to the Mormon thing stuff, and but basically as a young girl, she's pretty much isolated. She's pretty much kind of has no contact with the outside world. Until like a certain age, she never even saw like a television or read any newspapers, anything like that. And it's again like kind of these things that like these mechanisms that we see repeated in like kind of the things that unfortunately Islam has kind of really kind of grabbed onto, stuff like that. And I think what to me, like kind of you kind of mentioned Nazi Germany stuff. It's interesting how whether that one's more like kind of a political thing and stuff, but yet it's still about like kind of this idea of control, about like kind of where basically people going to the extremes of like kind of following things and stuff. And I'm also reminded of kind of John Lennon's thing about like not believing in isms and stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it's definitely becoming a fanatic of anything is always a dangerous thing to do, unless of course it's our channel, which is absolutely 100% good idea for all and sundry. Definitely this the idea of these sort of beliefs taking over, but I think as well you have to look at this as a belief system in the absence of any adults, and so there has to become some kind of intrinsic link to parenthood as well, from the way I see it, because it's kind of and you see, and they kind of have this interesting balance of when Burt is trying to escape and or fend off the kids, he's actively trying not to hurt them, but is also trying to reason with them like an adult and saying, what are you actually doing? Which I kind of felt was this either representing a kind of a generational struggle, or perhaps an even, country differences within America, perhaps, of trying to sort of reconcile stuff between very religious and unreligious people, I suppose.
And between like governments and religion, stuff like that, there's this kind of parenting that kind of happens as well. Like in other words, different times, like kind of what you're saying too, with like kind of Burt, kind of wanting to reason with them like an adult, stuff like that. I think it's funny how there's still this dynamic that, like, if like in certain situations where the kids are kind of almost running feral, so to speak, they have this almost like a need, and we saw that also in the Mega Man. They have kind of a thirst for like kind of adult figure to kind of lead them and stuff.
Well, I mean, people say that's the reason why various sort of extremist groups have sprung up, because of I think it's Jordan Peterson probably said it, but he's saying the lack of a strong sort of male figure in people's lives drives them towards more extreme sort of male leaderships outside of their family. Take that as you will. It's Jordan Peterson's words, not mine. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, in this though, I mean, in terms of the parenting link, I mean, they do effectively adopt the two kids at the end. It's like, hey, and that's one scene I found really weird anyway.
Yeah.
In that the kids who've just been sort of butchering adults for the last God knows how many years,
right,
doing all sorts of things, all of a sudden they're just like, oh, well, that was pretty crazy. Hey, you're going to come and live with us? And they're just like, well, for a week? No, how about a month? Oh, all right then, yeah. And it's like, yeah, they're going to need about 10 years of therapy after what they've just gone through before and let them live with me. But yeah, it was, that's very kind of just sort of thrown in there at the end. And it's a very kind of weirdly trying to have a feel-goody ending, but doesn't quite work. But I mean, for me, one of the most sort of disarming things or unsettling things I would say about this movie is that it's one of the few horror movies that is about children that's actually narrated by children. Like, you're actually seeing Job's point of view for a lot of the movie as it's narrated by him. And it's almost this weird indifference to what's going on in his dialogue that's kind of unsettling. Like when he sees, he says, oh yeah, I went to go and get an ice cream in the store. I saw Isaac over there. He was looking real creepy. And then it happened. And it's just like, well, it happened. Your family got butchered and everyone around you was murdered. And then, it may just have been a result of a child actor not being able to perhaps portray an intensity of emotion. But I think almost it feels like the director said, okay, just say this very matter of fact. Yeah. And it sort of underpins this idea that children can kind of adapt to quite dangerous situations very easily without having a full understanding of what's going on. So for me, that the way they portrayed Job and how it sort of played out with Burt trying to reconcile with them saying, hey, you're going nuts here, was very much the kind of, I think it really did sort of strongly play on this parenting theme.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with that. I think it also is a thing of where, like different times, kids are, of course, like sponges, and they will learn, reactions and stuff like that. And so like sometimes when you see like kind of, bad acting and stuff, it's usually because, as an adult, like kind of, we learn like kind of like from bad actors of like, like, oh, kind of we should act a certain way to kind of show surprise and stuff like that. And whereas a kid, like different times, if they're really surprised, they may kind of, like really, react, like kind of just look and stuff like that. But their reactions different times, like you said, are a little bit more natural in the sense of where it's just, what comes from them. And in some cases, it's also partially, I think, that they are, they have that resilience and stuff, so they may react for that split second, then they kind of just, kind of go on from there.
Yeah, I mean, trying to get a kid to sort of really be menacing and evil is, not a very easy thing. It's very rare that I've even seen that. But I mean, that's partly why, this kind of story and The Exorcist and The Omen and things like this are quite good, because it uses, children as a threat is a very unexpected thing, or at least it was back then.
Right.
Now the diamond doesn't in horror movies, but still, I mean, the other thing I did was kind of cool about this in terms of the way it, maybe just the way it was sort of the scenes were shot and stuff, because the corn is obviously very high.
Oh, right.
And it's quite sort of visually threatening in that you don't really know, you can easily hide in the corn, and obviously it would have been quite sort of terrifying for the kids to be hunted down in fields of corn and stuff. So, visually that was quite interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I thought that it has this kind of creepy effect that it's explored more the other kind of movie on Netflix that's based on this Stephen King kind of story called In the Tall Grass, and
Mm,
so there's something about like kind of that. It's not even maze like, it's just kind of like this kind of bewildering kind of atmosphere that I think they kind of touch on it somewhat, and then like we'll talk about the remake, kind of like they tried to do it to some effect and stuff. And having
mm,
been in some cornfields, I can definitely tell you, like it's very disorienting. The
yeah.
fears from like kind of different times, like not knowing, like kind of if you're gonna get out of there, because you could be wandering around like aimlessly and stuff, because everything looks the same, of course.
Yeah. I also kind of like the idea that, you know, the roads kind of conspired supernaturally to direct the car to
Oh,
wherever
right,
they're going
yeah,
without, that's
that,
always
that
that
was
kind
pretty
of
good.
reality shifting thing. Um, yeah. I mean, I think as well, the other interesting, I guess, again, yeah, bang on about the parenting thing, but you'll notice that when it came to this young couple who seemed quite happy, when it
Mm,
comes to making decisions about either direction they're going or who's going to,
mhm,
his internship, that's when
mm.
all these arguments start. And it's kind of
Oh,
like, that's often like, young couples who are trying to decide whether they should have kids or not. This can often be
mm.
sort of sources of conflict as well as something I've kind of noticed. But yeah. Um, I thought the other interesting thing was the burning of the field as a way to get rid of the monster,
Hmm.
because you often sort of in agriculture, and not that I'm in that world, but you sort of burn crops, or from you know the idea of allowing the new crops to come through and getting rid of what is damaging and old. So it's kind of definitely tied to intergenerational refreshment, or bring up new things. So again, I guess it's a kind of that's where I kind of pulled the whole raising children between different generations and highlighting those differences is where I kind of picked up on that. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought we should mention that like this was really made on a very low budget, like
I'm
less than
sure.
$1 million. But like kind of what's called it did pretty darn well in the box office, kind of like almost something at the paranormal activity level and stuff like that in terms of return.
Right.
Um, at the same time, though, it was pretty much panned by the critics and all that. So that's what's
Mm.
kind of funny. It has a pretty low like kind of rating, but I think meanwhile though, like it's kind of like became a cult kind of horror. I don't know, like I wouldn't say classic, but it's like it's got its fans and stuff, and certainly spawned like this like several kind of sequels and kind of, and of course we'll get into remakes shortly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the first horror movie and the first maybe even horror story that is generally unsettling about children just going rampant and just murdering
Yeah.
the adults. That's a pretty unsettling theme, regardless of how
Mhm.
well it's executed, really. And I mean, I think it was well directed in a way. It's like it moves along at a good click. There's not too much fat.
No.
It's pretty lean in terms of movies. Performance by Isaac is really good. The effects are a bit ropey, and it's a bit slow in parts, but I mean, generally the performances are generally decent. The kids do a good
Mm.
job, and yeah, I mean, overall, it's not maybe the best horror movie of all time, but it's still effective. Not really
Mhm.
that frightening these days, but interesting and thought provoking, I would say, if nothing else.
Yeah, I think it kind of definitely fits under the what's called heading of like classic '80s horror and stuff. It definitely has that kind
Yeah,
of vibe, and kind of it definitely has enough kind of memorable things to it. So
yeah, and I would say the jump scare at the beginning is
mm,
some really good misdirection, actually.
right,
Um,
right.
but I won't spoil it for anyone because we're always good at spoiling things. But
Yes, you are.
yeah.
So shall we go on to
Absolutely.
talk about
Yeah,
the
the two
remake?
the yes. The
So in 2009, of course, we have this remake with David Anders as Burt now. He's, of course, from several television series such as Alias and Heroes. And then once again, we have Kandyse McClure, who we saw previously in Carrie, and then, of course, where she really made her name on the Battlestar Galactica that we'll talk about at some later date.
At some point, yeah.
I found this couple to be really hard to like. I mean, I really like kind of, like I feel like, like typically you want to have, protagonists that you're rooting for and stuff, and they're just bickering away, and I just like kind of like, why am I supposed to like hear what happens to them?
This was hard work, this one. Yeah. I mean, there were lots of things I didn't like about this movie, but yeah, I mean, the fact that I thought they were going to kind of, it was interesting that they had an interracial couple in the 70s,
Sure.
but only from in only a very sort of superficial way, because there wasn't really much other than them arguing that was highlighted, and they didn't really and now I am going to spoil things, but by killing her off about halfway through the movie, you're basically dropping the whole parenting angle of the movie. That it loses any commentary on that in terms of how adults and children interact, and it definitely loses it when our ex-Marine buddy starts sort of like stabbing children in the neck, and she shoots them with a shotgun, and he's there like, breaking their necks and things like this. I'm just like, we've given up on any kind of tasteful boundaries with this movie. They make absolutely no. And I mean, the dialogue is just laughably bad. And this is, I'm trying to pinpoint exactly what is so bad about this in terms of the dialogue, because I've seen this a lot of times in a lot of the remakes, and I can only kind of sum it up as unnecessary, contrived macro exposition that is laced with superficial emotion. So it's like they try and either tell you something about their worldview or the director's worldview, or it's like they're trying to throw in loads of details about the character's backstory, but in a way that isn't just the character talking to the camera. So, and it comes off as so kind of irritating, because, I mean, we learn so much about their marriage from Kandyse McClure's character, because that whole opening scene, it's bickering, but it's bickering where she's also trying to tell you loads and loads about his character. So they go, did they do this in Viet Cong when you were there fighting in the jungle? War hero, Purple Heart hero guy. And our marriage has been on the rocks. We moved from California and now we're over here in Nebraska. And it's like, you were over there cutting off grandmother's tits and killing children, and this should just be like a run in the park for you. It's just nonstop that she's just like giving us all this extraneous information.
Yeah. I feel sorry for the actors, because they're both decent actors, and you have to kind of plod through that kind of dialogue and stuff, and try to like make it where you're again not looking like you're acting and stuff. It's really almost impossible, I think. And so it's like kind of at that point they're probably just like I don't know, they're probably ready to be killed off themselves and stuff.
I know, right? I was ready for them to be killed off. I mean, for me, what was kind of at least enjoyable about it was the fact that, the Marine was faced with these poor kids who've been traumatized, just like, well, you're on my territory now. Right? I'm a jungle warrior, right? You're in my turf. And then you're just like, smacks a kid down, stabs the other in the neck. Go, come on, then you got some more.
I had to mention that knife throw from across the street was like,
that was kind of
I was dying. Yeah. That was a hell of a throw, though.
It was a hell of a throw. Yeah. And I mean, it's
and then the chase is like kind of like it should have been scary, but it was just really like it just got to the point that like you're just laughing.
And it loses. I mean, the major thing in this, that they dropped all of Job and Sarah's story. So what's effective about the first one is you have him and his sister. You see their lives of these two kind of innocent kids who are thrown into this horrible kind of like cult, and they're the only ones that are trying to grasp hold of a normal life.
Right.
And all of that is completely gone in this. It's just like there's just a bunch of kids chasing people around in a field, and it's it really loses a lot from that, I think.
And supposedly the idea of this one was that they were like, okay, we're going to use actual child actors and stuff. And I felt like it actually didn't work. It was like kind of like this was one SEAL team movie where they used actual SEALs. And the problem was that like, they were great in the action, but then, like once they had to act, it just didn't work. And I felt like, like kind of with the kids, it was fine as long as they were chasing. But the thing is though, that like, everything up to that was like kind of, just I mean, if you're just having chase scenes and stuff, it kind of it loses something, like I mean, it just kind of like it just becomes silly, kind of running around and stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, as well as killing children, we also got some children having sex in this movie, which was,
whoa, that was like kind of
that
that was a surprise,
blue, wasn't it? Yeah. Hence, we throw back to your casting for 18-year-olds who look like they're younger than 18.
I'm thinking that they must have had to have shot that right. I would hope that like with the kids like not like because like in the course of the scene like it's them staring at like kind of this couple like in the act and stuff like that. But I'm thinking like there's no way that they would like kind of like I can't see any parents like kind of what's called agreeing to have their kids kind of just sit there watching two people doing simulated sex and stuff.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, obviously Isaac is played by a child actor.
Right.
And as
it's just not as effective as
not even vaguely, I think it goes to like, I think when it comes to the whole nature nurture thing, I think you have to really nurture evil in children to some degree, because obviously you can't find any children who can act convincingly as evil. No. They need to be at least over the age of 20 to be convincingly evil in Hollywood, it seems. Right. So or have enough exposure to it in their lives. So yeah, that completely fell flat for me.
Yeah, and I should mention also that Daniel Newman, who plays Malachai in this case, we actually had seen him before in The Crazies. Actually, he was the young guy who like kind of is actually was trying to get away from everything. So it's interesting, like kind of that was a connection I didn't make while watching this and stuff, but I just kind of noticed. Let's go.
Other thing we should mention actually is that the producer of the 2009 remake was actually the producer of the original from 1984.
Oh, right, yeah.
Different director though, which clearly makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Because I think actually the producer directed the 2009 one.
Okay.
Which shows you some people can produce and some people can direct. So, but interestingly, and I didn't even realize this till I started looking at it, but they're actually doing another remake of Children of the Corn this year.
Well, it turned out like they were originally supposed to do like a remake and stuff, but then it turned out to be a prequel. It's kind of a little bit like what happened.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
With what's called when we were, which movie was that? It was the not Pulse, but the other one.
Yeah, it was one of the Japanese horror remakes, wasn't it? Yeah. Please see our previous videos for more details because we can't remember. I mean, I guess as well in this one, you can kind of say this touches on themes of teenage pregnancy, which weren't in the original. Again, kind of like you can say it's a lack of parental oversight, or maybe, going back to a very, very old way of life that is very far removed from modern life. It didn't seem to have much more to say. I'm probably giving it more credit than is due by that.
It made it more of like a pagan thing too. That's what I thought was funny, which is kind of, I guess, like it wasn't really making any kind of statement with it, but at the same time, there's this kind of funny thing sometimes of where you may have like kind of some of these fundamentalist, religions that either simulate or kind of like really draw on a lot of pagan beliefs, and whereas like kind of that thing where it on the one hand like kind of you say you following Christian faith and beliefs and so on and so forth, but you're really using these rituals that's taken from like kind of these non Christian sources, so to speak.
Yeah, I almost prefer the other way around, where you have devil worshippers who then go and sort of work in charitable things. They try their hardest to reverse the whole perception of something like that, or work with magic sigils and things like this. But then are actually just very normal people. But yeah, it's yeah, there was definitely I mean, it was, you kind of got the impression that, I mean, Isaac didn't come across as a convincing cult leader, and there wasn't really enough supernatural things happening to make you think that these other kids would be so terrified. And there's also no kind of justification as to why they would go around killing all the adults. Or, I mean, there wasn't much in the original, really, to be honest, but there's even less in this.
Yeah.
So it's,
I felt like, granted, in the end, like kind of having this big reveal of he who, walks behind the rose was kind of like this, like kind of what's it called? We saw some of that, like kind of the special effects in the original, stuff like that. And here, like all we see is like kind of some of the rattling of the the corn, and then like kind of the demise of like kind of the couple, stuff like that. Which
is also really irritating. I mean, I thought, we've already had, I got annoyed because with about 45 minutes into this movie, all we've had is the one car crash. And there's a lot of exposition and bickering about their marriage. Like that first 45 minutes, then things start kind of happening. And then there's a bit more. And then there's his whole kind of flashback to Nam, which takes, God, like 10 minutes or something. Yeah. He's just running around in cornfields, and there's sort of shots of Viet Cong soldiers that he's hallucinating, but it seems to take a long time to get through that part of the movie. And then right at the end, when we see Vicky strung up, she's still there exposing, doing exposition. She's there going, oh well, I had my eyes ripped out and I came in this, and it's not so bad here in the afterlife where I'm in hell, and you're going to come join me. And I'm like, oh God, just please give poor Kandyse McClure a break here,
I mean, like, although I would say that the Dune series was like kind of, well, definitely one of those we'll get into, stuff like that. It wasn't too bad from what, I've only watched part of it and stuff. But it just, generally speaking, unfortunately, this almost seems like the caliber of SyFy Channel movies, like kind of, like kind of in general, like you come to expect. And I feel like that's kind of like what really is the big driver here. That like, I don't know who is what their filter is and stuff like that, but it's definitely not the same filter as we see in some of the other cable channels and stuff of, like what they decide to fund and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a bit hit and miss, isn't it, really? Sometimes you get something pretty decent, but not often. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was I didn't really know what it was really trying to say. It all just kind of left you with everyone dying. No real kind of reconciliation, no kind of deeper themes other than,
and there's a post-credit scene that like like what was the point of it? It was like
I didn't even stay long enough for that. As soon as those credit roll, like thank God, and turned it off. But yeah, what actually happened?
Well, apparently all it like they said, right, that Malachai will kind of they're going to change the age of favor to even lower, stuff like that, right? So Malachai was obviously like kind of right away like going to be up for that, and so they just had him kind of walking into the corn. I mean that was it. It was kind of like, okay, and the point of that was like kind of
yeah.
Oh, he did say goodbye to his pregnant girlfriend. I mean like kind of okay.
Not that there was any kind of plot at all based around them, but unimpressive, I guess, would be how I'd sum it up.
I think overall though, this gets to the main question of different times these remakes is what's the point? Like kind of it just seemed like overall like they could have had some point, like they did touch on like that Vicky in this case supposedly has some kind of issue with her religious background and stuff, and that would have been an interesting thing to explore in some ways. But Lord knows that like the last we needed though was like more exposition about it to kind of try to explore it. So it's just maybe better off that like we just kind of cut our losses and just kind of like just
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's there's probably different things you could raise in terms of intergenerational parenting differences, or there's probably lots of themes you could have touched on, or what children have to go through. I mean, I came to a conclusion after watching this that actually an easy way out for filmmakers, or a cheap way out, we'll say, when making a horror movie, is to either set the horror movie in the past when there weren't such thing as GPS and internet and all this kind of stuff,
Right.
or in a post-apocalyptic future where there's no GPS and internet. Because either way, you don't have to take those kind of things into account when you're actually theorizing your plots, you know.
Right.
So this one, I kind of felt was a bit convenient that it was set in the 70s because you didn't have to. But I mean, Vicky's character seemed to be very modern. You know, she's thinking about the price of oil and like how cynical she is about religion and everything else. She seemed pretty modern, I suppose. It's supposed to be again a kind of an audience surrogate, but
and I have to admit that the other kind of personal peeve I have is that the portrayal of a veteran, like the PTSD veteran, is like it's like almost like kind of every cliche that they could have for that, rather than like kind of again like more interesting kind of portrayal and stuff, or more genuine and stuff. It just seemed like they kind of went with like what people's perceptions are, like kind of the beliefs about veterans and everything, rather than like kind of having a more genuine character and like kind of that's strangely enough maybe through research or like actual actually talking to a veteran or something like that.
I mean, if I base my idea of what veterans were like on this movie, it would be that when faced with a group of potentially dangerous children, they'll just kill all of them. Ex-veterans would just happily kill children any day of the week. So,
which like sure enough, that's what they used to kind of chant about, right? Calling them baby killers or whatever, or something like that. It's like that, and even like Vicky, right? Which apparently like she's kind of the voice of that kind of stereotype too. And I don't know. I think anything that like I don't know, like that we did get out of this, like anything that like was
positive. Really... It's a good question. I'm really trying hard to think about something else. The music, they reused the music from the original. That was nice to hear again. That's tough. Yeah, not a lot. It was nice to see Kandyse McClure at least not in a role that's in BSG. Really not much. It had very few redeeming features, this. I don't know if you got anything out of it at all, but
I thought the one thing that like they captured, like kind of somewhat decently, was this kind of this town and I don't know, for some reason like the town wasn't as creepy in the original, I thought, as this one and stuff. So I thought that they did a decent job. So maybe kudos to the set design, I guess.
Big thumbs up to set design and music on this one. No, I take your point. They did do a better job of making it look more deserted. There's also the kind of the time difference factor in this as well, in that it's supposed to be 12 years later, but Isaac seems to have not aged.
No,
it's kind of weird, where everyone else did. So
I mean, was Isaac a baby then when the kids first killed the adults? And so like and as it is, he still seems like as like kind of still very much like a kid. Like I mean, I think that's one of the things that like the adult versus having a kid act just like that. He just looks like a kid who's like yelling at everybody, like kind of versus like in the original. I mean, Isaac had a presence. I mean, that was the thing that having that adult actor, it just seemed like it was unsettling that like this kind of kid, at least the character seemed like an adult and stuff like that. I mean, granted, he really was, but the thing is, though, based on like kind of just again how it was shot or how like kind of it was portrayed and stuff, you kind of like believe that this was this weird kind of kid, right, and stuff.
Yeah. I'm at a loss. I would say,
Well, I think maybe we'll just definitely chalk this up as one of those that like we would not recommend. In fact, one of the things I had as an idea is that we should at some point go through and just like kind of mark like which remakes we would would recommend, and then and of course most of them are that we wouldn't.
No. Yeah. maybe we should just. I mean, would it be a bit much just to have a video where we just list off movies and we just go yep or no and just carry on like that? It's the saying yeah and no for like half an hour. But I don't know how entertaining that'd be. But
right. It would be like kind of funny, I think, to do like a not quite a remake, but it would be like us kind of just going back to like kind of looking at what's called as a replay, I guess, of like kind of our overall like 20 discussions and stuff.
I know, right? I mean, I do sort of feel, I mean, obviously these are not short videos. We could maybe start doing edited highlights versions or something like that.
Right. There we go.
Yeah.
Well, coming up, we'll be looking at Pet Sematary as the next of our Stephen King looks of remakes versus original. And we also have discussed about, of course, as mentioned, talk about the Dead Zone and the Stand as some series that are kind of right now, interesting to discuss. Definitely, we'll see about kind of rounding out our what's called Stephen King discussions. I'm Jen Chang once again with Dan Evans, and we'll catch you at the movies.